Okay. All right. Here we are. It is speaker series number 4. So today it's nutrition, as we talked about. So we've talked a lot about exercise, but there's a purpose to that, right? So exercise is, as I've learned for the last couple years, is probably more important than nutrition for longevity, and we'll kind of talk about why that is. So we spent a lot of time talking about that, talking about why exercise is important, talking about zone 2 because we're doing that in the challenge, which zone 2 is amazing because the results on the InBody were incredible. So anyways, so now we are going to go to nutrition. So we are definitely talking about nutrition. So today it's nutrition. It's probably going to be a little bit different than what I've talked about in the past. Still the food is the food, but hopefully you'll learn something today. And then we'll have one more speaker series that I think is going to be on sleep and sort of the mental health and all of that kind of stuff, stress reduction and all that. So we talked about exercise for a good reason. It is the absolute best mechanism we have to improve health span. So the reason that is, so initially when I first started reading about this and following Atia and all that, and he was saying how important exercise is and that net nutrition is second, I was kind of like, I'm not sure I buy that. Well, what I buy though is, so nutrition is still super important for metabolic health and wellness, but in terms of longevity, nutrition only gets us so far, right? So we've talked about how important exercise is. So if you want to live a long, healthy life, yes, you have to be healthy nutritionally, right? So you have to be metabolically healthy. But if you are not physically healthy, if you are not exercising, then you don't have the longevity part of it, right? So we do have to have that exercise for that longevity, which then just brings us with everything. So exercise helps our mental health, helps our physical health, helps our metabolic health. So exercise does it all. Whereas nutrition, if you just do nutrition, you probably won't live a long, healthy life, right? You might be healthy, but you're going to wither away and muscle away and not be able to live long and healthy in terms of how you want to live your life. And so that's the difference, where it's not, I'm not diminishing exercise, nutrition, and he's not diminishing nutrition. He's just saying, if you had to pick one thing, exercise checks all the boxes, whereas nutrition does not. And really, at the end of the day, it has to be all of it, right? So it has to be exercise, it has to be nutrition, and then as we talk about, it's going to be sleep. Sleep is so important. And then obviously mental health and wellness and stress and all of that. That's all really important if we want to live a long, healthy life. So then we're going to talk about our so when you see me with SAD up there, Standard American Diet, so that's what that's going to stand for, and how terrible it is. So if we do fuel our body with that Standard American Diet, which most of us do, we will likely become overnourished and metabolically sick. So how we fuel our body determines how healthy we will be and how well we will perform. So I've been studying nutrition for years, like way before I even started to do this. So I've always been interested in nutrition, and it's just funny, we always talk about it with the kids a lot, what I used to think was healthy and how I used to feed our kids. So I was the same person as most people are, where I used to read the labels like fat-free, low-fat, or sugar-free, gluten-free, and all those fancy things that they put on packages to help us buy. So I did all of that. So my kids ate all the sugar-free stuff, used to drink diet sodas. But then over the years I have evolved, right? So then the last 10 to 12 years I've spent a lot of time studying nutrition, and my whole process and my thought process has changed a lot in terms of how I help people with nutrition. So I am a nutritionist, but so how I help people get healthier with it has changed probably a lot, I would say, over the years. The food itself hasn't necessarily changed. It's just like how I deliver that message and what I have found to work and not work. The best thing, and that's why I'm trying to do this, and hopefully, like Doug said, can we pass this along? Absolutely, you can pass all of them along. The more the better, right? That's why I do it. It's like knowledge is power, and then what you decide to do with it is up to you. So you know it, and then if you want to follow it, great. If you don't, that's your choice as well. We live in a free country, obviously, but most of it, if you follow what the government tells us, what the food industry tells us, what the media tells us, you end up like 88% of the population metabolically unhealthy. Because if you follow what they're trying to tell us out there, it's just not a healthy way to live, right? So I gave a talk during COVID, I think, when we were shut down and I was doing those Zoom things. That's terrible when I look back at that. So 88% of the population is has metabolic health disorder, which means they have, and we're going to talk about that here in a second, means they have at least one metabolic risk factor. So 88% of the population, right? And yet the government, the food industry, the media tells us what to eat, and 88% of us are metabolically unhealthy. So that's just such a frightening statistic, and it just tells you how wrong they are. So we're just going to review those metabolic risk factors. So for you to be sort of have that risk for the 4 horsemen that we talked about earlier, 2 or whatever series ago. So risk factors are elevated blood pressure, and or you're on the medication to control blood pressure. So if you have elevated blood pressure and you take medicine to control it, that doesn't eliminate your risk. All you're doing is taking medicine to control blood pressure, right? If you want to take that off the list and say, I don't have metabolic risk factors for that, you have to be able to have low or normal blood pressure without taking medication. So that's just a metabolic risk factor. Elevated blood sugars, so that's your pre-diabetes and your diabetes, that and or you're on medication. So if you're taking insulin or metformin to control your blood sugars, then that's a metabolic risk factor. Increased visceral fat, so this is a big one. I talk to my patients or my clients a lot about that. That's this, right? So visceral fat is the bad fat, the metabolically unhealthy fat. So it's metabolically unhealthy. It's the stuff that sits on our organs. So it's like a brown fat. It's bad for us. So if you are going to have fat, try to have it here and here. We can't control where we have it, unfortunately. But if you're going to pack it on somewhere, it's better on our arms and our legs. Right here, it makes us really unhealthy. So it's sitting there, it's on our organs, all of our major organs, right? And it makes us metabolically unhealthy. So if you have that, where you have a waist circumference of bigger than 35 or males bigger than 40, that puts you at a higher risk, and it gives you one of the metabolic risk factors. Elevated triglycerides, so that's your elevated fat that the doctor cholesterol that the doctor talks about. So if you have that and or you're on medication, so again, if you're on medication and your triglycerides are good on the medication, that still means you have that risk factor, right? It's when you don't need the medication and your risk factor, your triglycerides go down. And then decreased HDLs, that's the good fat or the good cholesterol. If that's decreased, that's a problem. So then that's a risk factor, and or you're on the medication to control that. So if you have any of those, then you're put into that 88% category of having a metabolic risk factor. Doesn't mean you have metabolic disease. People that have metabolic disease are the people that have all of those kind of things happening. So it's not just one, and usually, unfortunately, one leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, and all of those are happening mostly, likely, because of environmental issues, right? We all have genetics, so there's a genetic factor there, but usually our genetics, our habits are determining how our genetics are playing out for us. So then, as we talked about earlier, those risk factors of metabolic health lead to the 4 horsemen that we talked about a couple sessions ago. So that's your heart disease, your cancer, your neurodegenerative disease, so that's Alzheimer's, Parkinson, dementia, and then your type 2 diabetes. So we just sort of are reviewing all of that just in terms of talking about what our diet that we currently eat, that most of us, not me or us in here, but many people eat, that standard American diet leads to all of this. Okay, so what have I learned over the years? I said that I've done this for a long time, and I've sort of changed how I think about it. Food is food, it hasn't changed. It's just how I think about it. So so this challenge, why I didn't so every challenge I've done previously, I'm like, okay, we're going to eat gluten-free, we're going to eat, you can't have any carbs, or we're going to follow, you had to pick a primal diet, or you had to be paleo, or we've done Whole30 before. All of those have very, very similar properties to them, and they're all very, very much the same. But what I've learned is everybody is different, right? So we all can't do the same thing, and we don't get the same results from it. So what one diet works or one way of eating works for somebody doesn't necessarily work for somebody else. And I've seen that repeatedly where I'm struggling to help somebody thinking this is the way, and then it's like, well, let's try this instead, and then pretty soon that's the way for them. And so we all have something that's just a little bit different, and so that's why this challenge, I was like, you need to pick a diet, any diet, as long as it's healthy, right? Healthy food. And I just didn't put, the only thing that I really stipulated, which we're going to talk about tonight, is the protein. It has to have the protein. And then the rest of it can kind of be up to you. But it has to be sustainable. So whatever you decide, or I'm helping you decide, or figuring out, I've learned that if you want it to be forever, then if you are like, I'm not going to be gluten-free, I like this, I like this, I like this, okay, well then how can you eat where you have gluten in your diet? So, and that's okay. So what works for me doesn't work for everybody else. So that's why the diet today, or the one in the challenge, was what is good for you, okay? There's different approaches for everyone. There's just not one right way, and I've learned that through trial and error. But all of those diets, Whole30, Primal, Paleo, all have, there's keto, there's all those types of diets, low fat, Mediterranean, all that kind of stuff. It's really, all of them come down to eat clean, whole food, period. So there's not, you can't tell me a diet where it's like, yeah, you should eat some processed food in there. None of it. So then if you just go, that's how you should eat, right? It's simple, but it's not simple, and I understand that. So eat clean, whole food. That's what I just try to tell my clients right off the beginning is just get rid of the processed food and it'll figure itself out for you. Avoid the standard American diet. So our diet in the US is terrible, right? Because it causes all the things that we just talked about. Highly processed junk food. That's what it's based on. So if you follow what our diet is here in the United States, you're just not going to get the results that you need for longevity and a healthy life. So when we do that, so the first things I tell one of my clients is shop outside the perimeter of the grocery store, right? Not in the aisles. And so when you go to the grocery store, how do they set it up? Exactly that way. And if you focus on that and stay away from the middle, you're going to do pretty good. Ultimately, you need to eat enough to support a healthy weight. And that's the other problem that we have, right? So I can tell you to eat as healthy as possible, eat all the clean food, eat all the whole food, and then I'll still have people that can't lose weight eating whole, clean food because you just eat too much of it, right? So you can't eat too much of a good thing either. So we have to ultimately learn how to eat enough to support a healthy weight and not become overnourished, and support the muscle mass needed to do what you want to do to live a long, healthy life. So that's the goal for all of us, for me, trying to help you guys, and then you guys trying to live your life, is how do I eat enough to support a healthy weight, right? And not become overnourished or undernourished, and then making sure I have enough protein in my diet to support the muscle mass that I need. And that is, of all the macros, that is sort of the best, or that is the number one that we have to pay attention to. Great quote from Pink. This is thanks to Kathy Worley. I didn't hear this, but it was on, would you say 60 Minutes?
60 Minutes on Sunday.
So she's being interviewed, and she was talking, I mean, imagine what she has to be able to do on that stage, right? So we do what we do in here, running around. I can barely talk to the person beside me when I'm doing that, or even on a Zone 2 bike. I'm like not excited to actually talk to people. But she's running around, and all these entertainers are running around on stage, making it look effortless, hanging upside down and still singing. She was in this clip where she was like singing while somebody was standing on her stomach. It was crazy. Anyways, a quote from her was, "I don't eat to look good, I eat to go far, fast, and hard." So I thought that was really cool because I think she's been criticized for how she looks. She's very muscular, so she looks like a lot of people in here, and yet that's exactly what she should be doing, obviously. Okay, eating healthy is hard work, especially here in America, obviously, because of that standard American diet. It's easy, right? Obviously it's not, because we look around, and even in here we all struggle. Everybody struggles. It's not easy. It sounds easy, right? So ultimately we need lean meats and fish, right? We have to have the protein. Number one, you have to have the protein. Number two, lots of vegetables. So you need to fill your plate with veggies. They got lots of vitamins and minerals and all the nutrients that you need, but it also fills your plate with healthy food and doesn't leave room for the other stuff, right? So lots of vegetables, nuts and seeds. So we want to get those healthy oils. Some fruit, not a bunch of fruit because it just contains that sugar, but you can eat fruit. People think I hate fruit. I don't hate fruit. You can eat it. You just eat it in moderation. So you need fruit. A little bit of starch, and that's what gets us into trouble, right? The starches that we eat, the carbohydrates. So we need a little bit of healthy starch, which we're going to talk about, and then no sugar. So that's basically what it is, and yet it's not easy at all. If it was easy, then 2/3 of us would not be overnourished here in the United States of America. But what I talked about earlier, what's that?
I got like a new term, overnourished.
I know, overnourished. I'm trying to be nice.
No, I read that in Peter too. I was reading.
Yeah, he talks about it a lot, overnourished and undernourished, and I'm like fat, overweight, but anyways. It's easy to sit on the couch and eat fast food. I talked about this earlier. It's easy to sit on the couch and eat fast food, obviously. It's hard to go to the gym and cook a healthy meal. And that is just pure and simple the difference. And so when I see it all the time, oh, I could never do that. I would never eat that. I couldn't do that. How can you do that? It's hard. But as we know, walking into this gym, it's hard, and yet the reward is just so huge. So anyways, our standard American diet is full of added sugars, highly refined carbohydrates, and processed oils. There's just like nothing good about what we eat out there in the world. It's full of unhealthy foods intended, yes, intended, like intentionally made this way to make you eat more. So they are built and designed to make you eat more. So whenever somebody says the food industry has your best interest at heart, that is absolutely untrue. They sell their product just like people that sell tobacco are selling you a product they know is bad for you because they want you to do that. It is designed to make you feel hungrier sooner than if you ate whole food, causing you to eat more and become overnourished and metabolically unhealthy. So that's the part, like the government, the food industry, the media, they are doing it on purpose. So you eat their food and you eat more of it. And we suffer the consequences of all that. So when we fill our plate, or when our plate is filled with processed food, there's no room for the food we need to eat, like protein. And that's when we're going to talk about how to fill our plate. That's the problem, right? We eat way too many carbs. Greg Glassman, he has a quote from years and years and years ago: get off the carbs, get off the couch. That's just basically our problem in very, very simple words, which is very similar to what I have at the top there. It's easy to sit on the couch and eat a whole bunch of carbohydrates. People whose diet is primarily the standard American diet are overweight and under-muscled. So, in terms of nutrition, we have 3 main macros, and actually Atia does talk about alcohol because he just said it just gets in the way for so many people, so it should have its own special spot. I'm not going to talk a lot about alcohol. I'm not going to preach to you about alcohol. I think we all know alcohol is probably not a great thing to eat or to drink, though he does say like moderation. So he's not saying, and nor am I, because that would be hypocritical of me to say that, though I'm doing much better. It's we all have our thing. So anyways, so he does say he drinks alcohol. He just is like, I don't drink a lot of it, and if I do, I don't I don't drink 5 or 6 glasses in a night. I might have a couple of glasses of wine. He said he tells his patients no more than 7 drinks in a week, and which I thought was like pretty reasonable, and no more than 2 at a time if you were going to do it. So for him, he's like, it's about moderation. But then the one thing he did say, like alcohol, the problem with alcohol is, yes, alcohol brings those extra calories, and obviously it's nutritionally void of anything. There's nothing good about it other than we just enjoy it. But it gets in the way of eating healthy. So I think all of us would attain that when you're drinking wine, you're more apt to be eating the chips and the salsa that are sitting on the table. Or if you're having a margarita, you're more apt to be doing things like that. It just lowers our inhibitions, and so we tend to eat more when we drink alcohol. So it does get in the way in that sense that it just makes us not probably make the best choices. So we have 3 macros: protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Protein are our building blocks for our body. They're the amino acids. If you hear people talking about amino acids, or it's in your protein supplement or whatever. So we have to have protein. It is a macronutrient that we absolutely have to have. We can't live without protein, or else there would be problems health-wise. Carbohydrates, we can live without carbohydrates. We don't tend to do that, but we could live without carbohydrates. They're mostly our energy source. So for most of us, we fuel our body with carbohydrates. So that's our fuel. And then there's fats, which is both. So we can fuel our body with fat instead of carbohydrates. And then they also provide those amino acids in a little bit of a different way, which we'll talk about. So we're going to start with protein first, since I've been making such a big deal about it with the challenge. Protein is the essential building blocks of life. Without it, we simply cannot build or maintain the lean mass that we need to live. We all need adequate amounts of protein every day just to live and be healthy. The older we are and the more active we are, the more we need. So this was something I wasn't aware of until I, again, became more educated. that I really need more protein than these guys need. Probably maybe not Kale because he's like works out 6 hours a day. But so the more active you are, the more protein you need. So then most of us in here are pretty active. So we can't really be on the 0.7, or we shouldn't be on that 0.7 of the minimum. You might not need to be on the 1, but then the older we are, the closer you have to get to that 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, or ideal body weight. Which I think all of us have attested that's really hard to do, to get that much protein, but that really is how much we need to be healthy, and then for that longevity benefit of maintaining muscle mass, which I know very well, and I see it happening on the InBody all the time, how easily it is for older people especially to deplete. The older we are and the more active we are, the more we need. The US, again, recommended guidelines are a joke, as is all the nutritional guidelines. So they recommend 0.8 grams per kilogram. So at first you look at that and go, oh, that's not bad. We're doing 0.7, but that's kilograms, right? So what that equates to is 0.36 grams per pound. So that's literally half of what I say is the not me, but the science community say is the minimum that you need. Half. That's the recommended guidelines. So what we need and what is healthy is what we're doing in the challenge. 0.7 to 1 gram of 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. So again, if you're 300 pounds, no, you're not going to try to eat 300 grams of protein. But if you're 150, 200, and you're at more of a normal weight, they kind of say, like, if you're more than 30 pounds over your ideal body weight, you should probably go with your ideal body weight. So then think of that, like if you're a 200 pound person, you should be eating 200 grams of protein. If you're 150 pounds, 150 grams of protein. That's the high end, and then the low end is that 0.7, but it is certainly not 0.36. That's half of that, okay? So what you're supposed to be doing is twice of what the daily recommended allowance is for the US Food Guide. Okay, so doing the challenge, we have recognized, obviously, and me too, like I thought I ate more protein than I did, and I intermittent fast, which makes it even trickier to try to eat that protein. And Atia talks about that a little bit as to intermittent fasting or time feedings, that it's really tough, and it's a very big challenge for me to try to get the amount of protein I need in that window. So I do it, but you tend to have to eat a lot of protein in a short amount of time. So he says you should be doing it in 4 meals a day to get, especially because I'm probably not at 1 gram. Well, I know I'm not. So then to probably, if I wanted to get to that 1 gram, I'd have to go to 4 meals, which would then make it literally impossible to intermittent fast. So he talks about 3 meals a day, right? So that you're getting, 30 to 40 grams at each meal. And then also that 4th meal being a protein supplement or something like that to help you get to that protein. So it's really hard to be intermittent fasting and eating the amount of protein you need. I still do it. I still like intermittent fasting. But again, it's sort of been one of those things where, yes, I think there's a ton of benefits in intermittent fasting, but is it the end all be all? It's just not for everybody, and I've also learned that. Protein, why protein is so good for us besides just the muscle mass? Protein helps satiate us, so that means it keeps us full longer. Part of the problem with carbohydrates, and again, they're built and designed, the processed ones, not the ones we buy or that are in the ground, but the ones we buy in the store, they're built to burn quickly and make us crave more. Protein helps satiate us. So I've heard this a lot from the people in the challenge, from you guys in the challenge, is you eat so much protein that you're full and you don't tend to want those carbohydrates because your plate is full. And that's one of the beauties of trying to eat healthy, right? We fill our plates incorrectly. Most of us do, and that's what gets us into trouble. If we focus and build our plate around the protein, then it tends to help satiate us, keep us full, and we're not craving that food 2 hours later because the carbohydrates have all burned off. So keeps us full longer, fills our plates properly. There's just not a lot of room for those healthy or those unhealthy carbohydrates, or even the healthy ones, where most people tend to put, half of their plate is full of rice or pasta or whatever it is. You don't very rarely go to a restaurant and order a plate of pasta with like a half a cup of pasta, right? It's a plate of pasta. And so then that's about 10 times more pasta than we should ever be eating in a meal. And then we've obviously talked about muscle mass. improves our metabolic health as well. Protein does. Okay, we've talked about adequate protein is essential to longevity. As we've talked in the speaker talks, that muscle mass and strength is the key determiner to how long and healthy we will live. And so without protein, we can't build the muscle, obviously, and we've talked about that to exhaustion. We talked about we deplete muscle mass, and we've talked about that. Okay. So this is a little bit of an interesting thing. So loss of muscle mass reduces our ability to live the way we want to live. So we've talked about that a lot, right? But it also diminishes our ability to look after ourselves. So we keep talking about longevity, meaning we want to live, and that's absolutely true. I want to live till I'm 90, 95, and then fall off the cliff. But then if you want to look at it as to what takes us to assisted living and the nursing home, it's not illness and disease. It's not that you have diabetes. It's not that you have heart disease. It's not that maybe if you have a stroke, that's different. But it's usually not the illness or disease that sends us to assisted living or the nursing homes. It's the inability to look after ourselves that does, right? And so that protein is a big factor in that, as is exercise. But people that are older tend to not eat enough protein to support the muscle mass that they have. And then those are the things that sends us to the nursing home. So he talks about it is really important to track the muscle mass that you have, especially as you age, so that you know if you are maintaining, gaining, or losing it, right? So we talk about how important it is and that we should eat the protein and I'll do all the stuff, but other than without going on the InBody, you have no way of knowing. So it is really important, and you have an InBody here. Most people don't have that accessibility to it. The only way you know if you're maintaining muscle mass is to get on the InBody. So I do highly encourage you guys to get on like every 3 to 6 months as a check, because you just don't know. You think you're doing well. We all think we're doing well, and then I get people on there and they're like, oh my gosh, like they just it's just so easy as you get older to lose that muscle mass, and you just don't even know it. So you don't want to be like 2 years later and go, oh my God, I've lost like 5 pounds of muscle mass and I thought I was doing enough. So it's here for you, right? So just use it if you can. Okay, and then we've talked about that. Okay, the one thing I am going to talk about though, plant versus animal protein. So most of us will get most of our protein from animal protein, right? So animal protein has 7 grams of protein per ounce. So if you eat 4 ounces of chicken, you're getting about 28, 30 grams of protein. But does all of our protein have to come from animals? It does not have to come from animals, but I would say, and I would argue that a lot of it has to come from animals, because plants are just not a complete source of protein. And I've talked about this one other time. So I'm not diminishing plants. Like, it's good, you should eat plant protein, but you can't get enough protein. So if I'm telling you you have to get 100 to 120 grams if you're a female of protein, you would have to eat a lot of plant protein. So we can get some of our protein from plants, but plant protein is there for the benefit of the plant in indigestible fibers. So plant protein has a lot of fiber in it, which is good for us. The fiber in fruits and vegetables and stuff like that is good for us, but we can't absorb it, which makes it good for us. That's why fiber is good for us, right? So it helps our digestive system and all that, but we can't absorb it all. So if you're somebody who's relying a lot on plant-based protein, you just have to be careful that if I'm taking a protein supplement that's plant-based versus whey-based and stuff like that, I'm only getting 50 to 60, and I've even heard it saying lower than that, somewhere in that 30 to 60 range, depending on what protein, what plant it is, that you're only getting half of it. Let's just say half, okay? So if it's saying 20 grams of protein on your supplement container, if you're doing a plant-based protein, you're only getting 10 grams of it. Now, does that mean you shouldn't take it? No, if you can't stand, so I was taking plant protein for a while, because for a while there I just couldn't do whey. So I was taking it, but I had to take into account that it wasn't 20 grams of protein like it said, it was 10. So then my only thing with that is, because people are like, you just hate people that are vegetarians. I'm like, I don't. I just don't know how you eat enough protein to be a healthy vegetarian, is all I'm saying. So I just don't think you can. You would have to eat so much. So then vegetarians tend to be on the low side of protein, and as we've talked about, protein is just so important for muscle mass, that I just don't know how you maintain that. So if you are a vegetarian, or you know somebody who is a vegetarian, you just need to be aware of that, so that you make sure you're making good choices, and that you understand what all that is, that you can only really absorb about half of that protein. So as a supplement, so you don't have to get, I don't get all of mine. I definitely get a lot of my stuff from animal or from plant protein. I can't get all of it with the plant, and so then I have that combination, which would be perfect. Okay, so I think we'll move on. We're gonna move on to carbohydrates. Does anybody have questions on protein? I know I'm just sitting here talking forever. No questions yet? Okay. Carbohydrates, so if you see me saying CHO, that's just an abbreviation for carbohydrates. That is our primary fuel source if you rely on carbohydrates. So I do more fat. So I probably use more fat as energy than carbohydrates, but that carbohydrates would definitely be the primary source for most people. Carbohydrates get broken down to glucose, which is then consumed by the cells to generate or create energy in the form of ATP. So carbohydrates give us our energy to do what we want to do in the day. The problem with carbohydrates, so carbohydrates, we need them, right? They're energy source. We have to have them. But the problem with carbohydrates is we eat too much of them and we eat poor quality. So we overeat carbohydrates by the abundance. And we eat way too much. So protein, we have a hard time getting enough. And so some people are like, well, what if I'm eating too much? I've actually got the statistics written down there. You would have to eat so much protein to be eating too much protein. So it would be very, very hard to do. Whereas carbohydrates, we shouldn't be eating that much. Really, I tell people you should really try to stay under 100 grams. You could do that with your eyes closed without too much effort. So we eat way too many carbohydrates. And then we also eat poor carbohydrates. So they're highly processed carbohydrates, so terrible for our metabolic health. And then we consume too much of them, so we gain weight and become overnourished. When we eat too much in the form of carbohydrates, it gets stored as excess fat. So our body uses some of the energy, right? But then the rest that we don't need, and we've eaten too much, we store it as fat, causes our blood sugar to elevate, and then we become insulin resistant. So then the sort of the path is if I'm eating so many carbohydrates, which is sugar and all that kind of stuff, then eventually you hear that term insulin resistance, means my insulin that is trying to move the sugar into my cells and try to get it out of my bloodstream is just becoming overworked and overused, and it just becomes resistant. It just doesn't work anymore. So then my bloodstream gets flooded with all this glucose, and then that insulin resistance leads to all the bad stuff, all the horsemen. What carbohydrates should she's eating a bone. What carbohydrates should we eat? So we talked about that, right? So I'm not saying don't eat carbohydrates. Absolutely, you can eat them. Just eat them in the form of whole, clean food, right? Vegetables, fruit, and some grains if that's what you prefer. So you don't have to eat the grains, but I'm not opposed to you eating the grains either. I try to avoid grains for a whole bunch of different reasons, but it doesn't mean that they're not healthy and you could eat them. But we just eat too much of them. So we're trying to eat, and if we're talking about grains, we're talking about like rice and quinoa and healthy stuff, right? We're not talking about pastries and pasta and all that kind of stuff. So for most of us, our carbohydrates come in the form of bread, cereals, cookies, cakes, pancakes, tortilla, chips, crackers, etc., etc., etc. So we're not getting it from rice and quinoa and all that stuff. We're getting it from the bad stuff. And sadly, that's what we talked about earlier. They fill up our plate, so our carbohydrates take half or more of our plate, and then it just doesn't leave the room for the protein. And that's where the problem comes in, and I think that's where people are seeing in this challenge when they're required to eat so much protein, is they're like realizing, God, if you try to eat that much protein, you really don't need or want that extra carbohydrates. You just can't eat all of that, right? So they just simply don't have the room, and they're not as hungry for them afterwards. Okay, he does talk about, this continuous glucose monitor. So you've seen actually Kathy, if you've been in class with her, she's wearing one, and I am looking at wearing one. I'm not going to go into the whole glucose monitor thing. If you're interested in it, it's actually an interesting tool. It is something that I think I might look at doing. It's used to be you had to have a prescription to do this, and it's meant for people with diabetes, right, to see their blood sugars and help control their blood sugars and insulins, all that kind of stuff. But he's saying that healthy people should wear this, not all the time, like wear it for a couple months, and then see what your body does with the food that it's eating. So it literally will tell you, and Kathy probably can tell you better than me, it will literally tell you what spikes your blood sugars. So she said the other day she was eating a salad and she just couldn't believe nothing bad in the salad, and it shot her blood sugars up. So it just helps you be aware. So the thing that I talked about, knowledge is power, right? So if you're wanting that knowledge, which I do like that, I would be interested in knowing what are the things that spike my insulin. And it's not necessarily the same for everybody either, right? That's what I've learned as well. Some people do better with carbohydrates. Some people don't do as good with carbohydrates. Some people do better with higher fat. Some people, then it does affect their triglycerides and stuff. So people are different that way. But anyways, if you're interested in getting or learning more about glucose monitor, I can give you some information. You could certainly talk to Kathy because she's actually wore one. And I think it would be like, just like the InBody, it would give you some insightful information. It's not cheap, obviously, but you don't have to wear it for long. You wear it for a couple months, you get an idea. You don't have to, we're not diabetic, so I don't need to sit there and watch my blood sugars for the rest of my life. But it would give you some knowledge to know, how is that food affecting me, so that maybe you would make some better decisions sometimes. All right, so we're gonna go on to fats now. So fats are that fuel source that we talked about that is both amino acids and, so it's got the amino acid source plus it's a fuel source, so it can be used either way. Your body prefers the carbohydrates, and if you eat the carbohydrates, it tends to use that as the fuel more than the fat. But if you do eat a higher fat diet like what I try to do, then your fat can become the fuel source, and you're not needing those carbohydrates. So they are very efficient fuel for oxidation. Think the slow burning log. So that fuel or fat is a slow burning fuel versus carbohydrates. It's that fast burning fuel, and we burn through carbohydrates. Again, why we get so hungry after we eat them. But they're also the building blocks for many of our hormones and our cell membrane. So they're a building block just in a different way than what muscle is, or what protein is for the muscles, okay? And it's really important. There's omega-3s, 6s, so there's different mix of fats out there that help us maintain our metabolic balance and the health of our brain. So fat is really important, right? So fat has been given like this bad connotation, and people think fat is the problem, and fat is the reason that we're fat, and fat is the reason that we have high blood pressure and our cholesterol is high. It's just simply not true if we're eating the right kinds of fat. It's more the carbohydrates and the sugar that's causing all those problems. But think like there was a reason when if you remember your kids, your babies, they made sure you gave them whole milk for the first year of their life, and then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, no, they can have skim milk, which makes no sense. But anyways, because they need the fat. They need the fat for their brain. So we all need that, but obviously babies need that more than we do. But fat is a fuel source for our brain. So usually when combined with protein, and so protein comes with fat, so we don't usually have to go seeking fat out. I don't usually decide I'm going to just eat an avocado just because I need a dose of fat. That's a keto diet, which is not my favorite. But with protein, you usually get the fat with it, right? So if you're eating steak, you're going to have fat. If you're eating chicken, you're going to have fat. So protein sources, good protein sources, have that healthy fat that goes with them. So then they're honestly your best fuel source, right? Because with fat and protein, there are two slowest burners. Carbohydrates are our fastest burner. So then it helps satiate us. Another reason why protein has to be on our plates. So then what types of fats you eat matters. So there's healthy fats, and then obviously there's unhealthy fats, just like there's healthy carbohydrates and then unhealthy carbohydrates. So when you're looking for your healthy oils, so think olive oil is healthy, coconut oil is healthy, avocado oil is healthy. Butter and lard are healthy, but you probably would just want to eat those a little bit in moderation. So you could eat olive oil every single day. You probably don't want to eat butter every single day just because it's a saturated fat, but still healthy for you, right? They are not the culprit. They are not the things that are causing all the bad stuff to happen to you unless you're like overloading on butter and lard, but that's just because you're eating too much of it. But avoid the vegetable and seed oils. Those are the ones that are getting in the way, right? So corn oil, not very good for us. Soybean oil, terrible for us. Sunflower oil. So really try to have just like the olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil. Those are coming from like the coconut, the avocado, the olives, instead of the seeds, corn oil and all that kind of stuff. So really try to avoid those seed oils and those vegetable oils. And then the healthy foods that we should be looking for is the avocados, the nuts and seeds, the eggs, the fish, the lean meats. All those have those healthy fats in them. You shouldn't have to like really seriously go, like I said, it's in all the stuff that we eat. So then you don't have to go looking for your fat necessarily. It just shows up if you're eating healthy food. A little talk on fish oil though, with omega-3s. So we should eat fish, right? We should eat a lot, not every day, but we should eat fish a couple times, 2 or 3 times a week. But sadly our fish quality is poor, our fish sources are poor. And so back in the day, you know, all of our food sources, so fish, chicken, beef, it's all terrible. So you need to like look for good sources of all of those meats. But with fish especially, so fish is an excellent source of fats, and especially that EPA, DHA, which I'm assuming you've all heard of. That's a necessity for health. So it's one of those supplements that I just talked to people about. Like there's tons of supplements that you can take. I take lots of them, but there's some that you should really take. Everybody in your family should be taking, and fish oil or those omega-3s is one of those, just because we can get it from our fish, from salmon especially, but the sources that we have today, like if you went and bought salmon at the store, it's not good for you at all, and it would have very low omega-3s in it compared to what it used to have. So you can't really use it as a source. And then you could say, well, somebody like, you could eat it every day. Well, you can't eat it every day because it's bad for you the way we farm our fish. So it has high mercury content, so then you can't really eat fish every day, or then you'll have other problems. So you really have to, with those EPA and DHA, you really do have to go find a proper supplement, and a good supplement, because most of them are bad, to get your fish oil or your omega-3. So I just wanted to bring that up. You should be taking it. Everybody should be taking it unless there's a reason you can't take it. And everybody, kids, everybody should be taking fish oil. Okay, last thing, when we've pretty much talked about this, what should our plate look like? So then we've talked about that. We've already talked about the carbohydrates, higher fat. So I do tend to eat higher fat, but I again have learned not everybody does well with that, and some people do better with carbohydrates. You're only going to know that if you play around with that. And I have played around with it, and I've played around with it with some of my clients as well. And some people just do. I'm not saying you're going to give them like 300 grams of carbohydrates now, but some people just do. So if you're looking to be like, you know what, I don't know if maybe I could do a little bit. I feel like I'm sluggish. Like Kathy was talking today, she was trying to reduce her carbohydrates, and she's like, I feel like I just don't have the energy. So she's probably somebody that just needs more carbohydrates. I don't do well with carbohydrates, and if I want to gain weight, I should just add some carbohydrates, because it just makes me gain weight. So I really stay away. I try to limit my carbs as much as possible, but I do well with that. I have plenty of energy, I don't feel lethargic, and I can control my weight that way. So you just have to sort of play around with what is going to work with you. Okay. So use macros. I used to talk a lot about macros. I used to, one of the nutrition companies or whatever that I used to work for was a big macro per people. And so I would just say with macros now, and again, I've learned that with people, and it's kind of the whole carbohydrates and fat thing. So you need the protein you need, and build your plate around your protein. And that's what I'm trying to help people do with the challenge. Get the protein. So you know you need like 30, 40, 50 grams of protein. Put that on there, and then decide the rest. And so your macros, probably is 30% of your plate should be protein. But then you got to kind of decide like how much carbohydrates, how much fat is going to be on there. And that really is what I've talked about. Like, figure out what works for you. You don't want a lot of carbohydrates obviously on there, or starches on there. You want lots of vegetables. But just don't be so caught up in the whole macros thing unless you like that. Some people love that, but you have to be really good at tracking those macros if that's what you're going to use. And what I've learned as a nutritionist is people are great for a little while, and then they're not. And then if you're not accurate and you're trying to like use FitnessPal, and you're trying to log all your stuff, you have to remember FitnessPal isn't accurate, and then your assumption of what you ate isn't accurate, and how you put it in there isn't accurate. So then you're getting like a guide, like a vague idea, and if you use that as your religion, and you're like, God, I'm not losing any weight, you could really be, 300 calories off on either side because you just didn't enter it right, or the person that put it in FitnessPal didn't enter it right. So just be careful of that. It really comes down to, how do I fill my plate? And I have learned healthy people don't really count macros. They just fill their plate and they eat healthy. And it's a simple, and yet it's not simple, right? So that's one of the biggest things I've learned. So build your plate around your protein. I've talked about that. Add lots of vegetables. Half your plate should be vegetables just because they're a volume carb. You can eat as much of them as you want in there. There's really not a lot of bad that can happen from that. And then you can put those healthy carbohydrates on there. Just be careful how much that is, right? A quarter of your plate. So you can put your potatoes, your sweet potatoes, your rice, your quinoa. If pasta is your thing or tortillas are your thing, that's fine, but they have to be this much. It can't be a plate of spaghetti. It has to be this. And that's where pasta, pizza, tortillas, all that stuff gets in our way. I have a hard time believing if you eat pizza that you can like somehow eat enough protein while you eat a pizza. It's impossible. So you're going to get a lot of carbohydrates and not very much protein when you eat pizza. It just doesn't fit in our plate, unfortunately. Though we try every single week. All right, so, and then ultimately, the less carbs you eat and the more protein you eat, the better. And I'm just meaning, again, don't think I'm hating carbs. I'm not. So you can eat carbs, but most of us eat just too much of it. So just lessen your carbs, increase your protein, the better you're going to be, right? To lose weight, you have to reduce the amount you eat. That's just plain simple physics. And you have to maybe eliminate certain foods. So the foods that you really want to eliminate when you're looking at how am I going to build my plate, sugar is a huge one. Avoid it as much as possible. There's just no, again, nutritional value to it. It's like alcohol. There's not one good thing that happens with sugar. So avoid it. Use that, like fruit has sugar in it. Milk has natural sugars in it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the added sugar, the stuff that we add to our plate. Avoid it as much as possible. Decrease your carb consumption and try to only eat healthy carbs. Avoid the processed carbs or that standard American diet and get rid of the sugary drinks. Don't drink your calories, right? Obviously. They can go into your bloodstream so darn fast, right? Your body doesn't even have to work at digesting them. They're liquid. So when you drink those sugary drinks, sodas, coffees, or whatever you're drinking, those juices straight to the blood sugar or straight to the bloodstream. So these spike your blood sugars. They are the biggest cause of elevated glucose levels and insulin resistance of all of it, of all the carbohydrates and everything is the sugary drink. So if you have a friend who's just really struggling, the first thing, get rid of the soda, get rid of the sugary drinks, and then start moving into a little bit harder stuff after that. Ultimately, for health and longevity, build your plate with clean, whole food and get to the gym, whatever exercise you do on a regular basis. Get your Zone 2 workouts in every single week, 4 to 5 hours a week. If you can, the results will speak for themselves. So here I am just going to say, when I put people on the InBody this time, halfway through the challenge, I seriously have never had results like that. So maybe, I don't know if it's a Zone 2 or not, but I don't know what else I could say other than these people. The people that did Zone 2 very regularly had great results. And the people that are doing it, it's on the InBody, it's in here. They're talking about that they're better on the bike. They're better when they're doing those long cardio WODs. They see the difference. And so I'm hoping that people are going to continue this afterwards. But the effects of Zone 2 and the health benefits of Zone 2, if you want to lose body fat, get on the bike or get out there and run or whatever that is for you and get your Zone 2 in. I just can't speak more highly about it. It is definitely working for people. I'm seeing it working for me. And the people that are doing it, I'm seeing it like every single day in the gym. So if you can, we started for the challenge, you were required to do three times a week, or for 3 workouts, 30 minutes every time. So that's an hour and a half. You really do. I know 4 to 5 hours. We only have so much time in our life. I get it. But just work towards that. If whatever you can do to help yourself. So 30 minutes would be the minimum you want to do for that Zone 2. So then slowly I'm up to an hour now. I hate it. It's hard to sit there for an hour, but I do it. And I'm not saying you have to sit there like an hour and a half every single day. It only has to be like 3 or 4 times a week, but try to get on there for an hour to an hour and 10 or 15 and work your way up to that 4 hours. I guarantee you will see the results that you want to see in terms of your health, your weight, your fitness, your VO2, all of it. It's hard work. It really is. I understand that. I know that. But hard work is meant to be hard. It's not supposed to be easy. And it is the best hard work you will do. All I got. Yep, that's it. So today that's this, and then next week is our last one, right? Or 2 weeks from now. And actually, I might not even be here now that I think about that. So that date might switch. I think I'm going to Denver now that I think about it. And it'll be sleep, and we're going to sort of put everything together: sleep, mental health, all of mental wellness, stress, all of that in our last and final one. Questions? You got to have questions about nutrition.
Okay, so now I hear more clearly that the difference between talking about longevity and nutrition and losing weight nutrition is, if you're losing weight, would you say that your nutrition is number one versus versus exercise?
Would I
When
put
trying to lose
nutrition
weight.
first?
When trying to lose weight.
No.
You still would
I
say-
would still say exercise. If you really read the research, it is like, and that's why I like reading a guy like Attia, because everything is backed by science. Like it's kind of to the point where you're like, okay, I thought his study after study after study after study he talks about, but it just proves a point. And so he was a big nutrition guy, and he still is. I'm not diminishing, but he is like, nothing will get you the results that you want more than exercise, even when you're trying to lose weight. Because zone 2, he talks about that when he talks about nutrition, and he's like, everybody's like, well, what's the best this, what's the best that? He goes, figure out healthy food and get your ass to the gym and get on the bike and do zone 2. That's what he basically says. So instead of worrying so much about the nutrition, which he's, again, not diminishing it, you're not going to lose weight if you're eating crappy food. You're just not. But if you do the work around it with that zone 2 especially, I think, and that's that added thing that we put in there, the results that you get from zone 2 are going to be probably more beneficial in terms of weight loss than just through that nutrition. Not saying nutrition's there, it's just got to be both with a real focus on exercise.
Also, I know our performance in the gym or anywhere is based on our regular eating. Do elite athletes, can people eat something the night before? It used to be eat lots of pasta, let's just say, to be energized for the next day. Is that a myth completely?
It would be, no, it wouldn't be a myth. What it would be more is like, so carbo loading or whatever that athletes do. It wouldn't necessarily be carbo loading, it would be fueling your body to perform. So then that kind of goes to the whole, how should we eat to perform? So the protein and the carbohydrates, and like if we're talking like performance in terms of elite athletes, they obviously eat way more carbohydrates than we do because they need them to fuel for what they're trying to do, right? So they do tend to eat higher carbohydrates than most of us do, or that most of us should do, because we just don't use that much fuel. But it's about eating to perform, right? So the day before, you should be eating healthy. So like, I'll just say like with the abs or whatever, they have a chef that cooks for them. And I mean, it would have been huge pasta and all that kind of stuff. And Ray said, it's not like the pasta's not there, but the guys have learned it's the protein, it's the good, healthy carbohydrates, and not just overloading your body full of carbohydrates like a plate of pasta, but like the fat and the fuel and the protein and all that, because then it takes you over to the next day. So they would probably eat that day before, eat like really healthy in terms of the protein and the fat, but then the next day they would be eating more carbs because they need to like use that fuel for whatever specifically they're doing that day, kind of thing. But it's not, there's still those carbo loading people, but I think nutrition has proven that you don't, and there's athletes out there that they've proven that they can also use fat as fuel, and that they're still very successful. But you just have to be more conscious of what you're doing if you're an athlete, like a professional athlete, trying to use that fat as fuel. Just because you have to be so careful with how you eat that way, in terms of the fat versus the carbohydrates getting in the way. Did that answer that question? Okay. Anything else? Okay. That's a wrap.